Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about part four of what is in your food and why. It can be found like all the other assignments in the assignment tab of the Canvas page for this course section. So here we go. Part four is finally here. Now is the time to build on the knowledge attained in parts one through three and share your narrative of your product in 1,500 words. Use your cited sources to support the story about the product that you want to share. Be sure to include the 5 content areas and explain if or how they are interconnected in this product. When you do this, remember the interdisciplinary approach from the syllabus with the different disciplines: biology, chemistry, economics, psychology. The list is basically limited to your imagination. If you could make an argument and make it work and connect it to a discipline, then you're good to go. Some sections of the paper will feel like a report, but remember that the overall scope of the paper should be the expression of your viewpoint and connecting the dots. So, this is you sharing your opinion backed by peer reviewed articles, by facts that you find about companies from the company website or a business directory or wherever the information came from. This is the time for you to share with, I'd say, the world, but this is your time to share with the class through this paper your your viewpoint on this product. So might be a little bit different than what you're used to. So some, like I said, some sections are going to feel like you're writing a book report like you did back in 5th grade about something. But overall, this is your telling of the story. What do you want me to know about this product, about the company? Um, who should buy it, who does buy it, who should not buy this product, should there be more of this product? I have a few questions here just to help give you some guidance if you feel that you need it. So, some things to think about: is your product meant for everyone or a specific population? What ingredients are the star of the show in your product? So if something is marketed on the package, does it highlight that they have something or that they don't have something? Oftentimes you see this with high fructose corn syrup. You see a lot of products that advertise in a big banner on their label, now formulated with no high fructose corn syrup. Or is it a product that says that it's free of hormones or antibiotics or preservatives? So, again, what ingredients are the star of the show in your product? What ingredients would you change? Would you add something? Would you remove something? And if you did make that addition or subtraction, how would they improve the product? Would it improve the cost of the product? Would it improve the quality of the product? Would it make the product more natural? Would it make the product taste better? Would it make the product have a longer shelf life? Would it make the product have a shorter shelf life or require refrigeration, but be closer to what the most natural state is in terms of something that you could make on your own? For example, a bread product, if you baked bread at home, it's going to be stale within a day. If you buy bread from the store, especially like Wonder Bread or brands like that of processed prepared breads, they last for over a week, and they're based on their sell by dates. And even then, you could probably keep them for longer than that and they would still be perfectly acceptable. But if you took the preservatives out of that product, you would lose that shelf life, but you would gain a product free of preservatives. So there's that trade off, there's that balance. So, is there an economic gain? Is there a psychological gain? There are so many different factors. You could also even think of with the Impossible Burger when it was finally the soy hemoglobin was approved as a color additive for the product by the FDA, and that approval as a color additive made Impossible Burgers eligible for retail sale. So what that meant was now you can have Impossible Burgers in supermarkets. Because before that, before the soy hemoglobin was approved as an additive, you could only get an Impossible Burger from a restaurant because they weren't allowed to sell them retail because they had an unapproved, or I'll say this, the color additive was not approved yet for sale in the food system. So, and what does the soy hemoglobin do? It basically is the part, or it's the magic to an Impossible Burger that when you put it on a griddle and you cook it just like a regular burger, you're going to see it bleed. It's that red color. So it looks more like a standard meat based burger, like a beef burger. So you could look at that as improving the product by making it look and behave more like the typical product, in quotes, typical, that the average population or average non plant based diet following population would see. So it's basically making it look more like what someone that doesn't follow a plant-based diet would see. It looks more like a regular burger while it's cooking. That might add to the appeal to make that bridge a little bit, or to make that gap a little bit less of a leap. So it's that bridge across for those that do not follow a plant-based diet to try this soy-based or plant-based burger that has added characteristics of a traditional burger. So that's one idea or one thought for how ingredients, by adding them or removing them, can improve the product. So psychologically, texturally, scientifically, food science, chemistry, biology, whatever it is, those are all the disciplines that you can throw at this. If you can think of it, work it into your paper. That's fine. The more connections you can make between disciplines in these 1,500 words, the better off you're going to be. That's what you're ultimately evaluated on. How well you can convey your point by drawing from as many different types of sources or disciplines as possible. Also, another question to ask: what would you say the recommended frequency of consumption is for this product? Multiple times per day, once a day, once a week, once a month, once a year, less than once a year? How often should people be consuming this product? And again, think back to the specific population. Is this for everybody? Should only some people eat this? If there's a product, and going back to that question about who's it meant for, if this is a product that's marketed toward a specific population, what would need to change, or what could change to increase the appeal to a broader audience? Is it the labeling? Is it the marketing, the ingredients? If so, something that is very popular but still hasn't reached mass appeal. Um, some of you are working with kombucha. So what could you change marketing? I mean, you can't really manipulate the ingredients. You can't take too much away from it because then you won't have a kombucha drink anymore. But can you add something to it that doesn't diminish what it is and increase broaden the appeal? Think in those terms. Overall, it is important to express how your knowledge or understanding of your specific product, of the ingredients used, and the manufacturer Now, when I say manufacturer, I could also, I mean the owner of the company, the manufacturer. They could be two things, they could be one thing, but it's important to express how your understanding of these things have changed from the beginning when you first started with part one, as you worked through part two with the identification of your ingredients, onto part three, where you started your literature review, and ultimately this part four, where you put it all together. Now we're going to go through the rubric here, which looks a little more involved than those for other assignments, but this one's a big deal. It's a 100 point assignment. It's worth 20% of your grade. So the first thing, it's a 1,500 word requirement. And where that came from is for this class overall, being an interdisciplinary general elective or an interdisciplinary elective, there's a requirement for the evaluation of 2,000 written words. So 500 of those words we already addressed. So 1,500 words is what we have left. So that's where the number comes from. If it wasn't for those requirements that are established by the university, then this assignment might look different. But this is where we're at. That's the reason why this assignment is 1,500 words. So the grading for the word count, it's basically 5 points based on this. So it's 1,500 words. If you type between 1450 and 1550, you'll get 5 points. And then if you have, if then there's a scale. So if you're basically 50 words under that, you'll get 4 points. If you're 50 words above that, you'll get 4 points. If you're 100 words below that, you'll get 3 out of the 5. If you're 100 words above that, you'll get 3 out of the 5. So that's just something that I want you to think about. It does make writing a little bit more of a challenge in that every word that you write should mean something. If you type your paper and you end up and you are a person that must get maximum points for every aspect or all for each of the criteria on the rubric, then you might spend some time rewriting a few sentences to make sure that you're in this 1450 to 1500 range. Of course, if you're at 1249 or fewer words, then you'll get 0 out of 5 points for this content area, for this part of the rubric. If you're at 1751 or more, then you'll also get 0 points, which might be crazy to see. It might be the first time ever in your college career or academic career overall where you are penalized for writing more. The assignment is 1,500 words. It's not better to write 2,000. It doesn't show that you, for this assignment, you're not showing me that you're able to write 2,000 instead of 1,500 because you know that much more about the topic. It shows you either don't want to follow the instructions or you could not follow the instructions. So the challenge is to choose your words wisely and create a structure that brings you into that 1,500 word range. For the word count format, basically what you're going to do after your works cited page, or if you do a footnotes, I guess it would be after that would be on your last page of the text overall. But if you do a works cited page, then that would be your last page. And below your last cited source, you would put word count, colon, and then the number that you get from your word count. And doing a word count is super straightforward in any of the word processing applications that we use today. If you need to, you can just highlight the text that is part of your word count, the body, the narrative of your paper, and then do your word count based on that, because name, titles, headings, the date, all those extra things that people put on papers do not count in the word, should not be included in the word count. So your word count is not going to include them. I don't need to see a title page. I don't need to see an abstract. I don't need anything like that. None of that is counted in your 1,500 words. I'm evaluating the body of your actual writing. Now, when you do your, and for that reason, we are going with the citation style of using numbers to represent your sources. So, number one, number two, instead of using the author's name and the year, because that just it fills up space, it takes up space, but it also is going to make it harder for you to go back in and take out those characters when you do your word count. Okay, so remember to add your word count after your last cited source or at the bottom of the last page if you're doing footnotes. That's worth 2.5 points. Now we're going to the peer reviewed or published journal articles. They have to be published after January 1st, 2005. And here's a little note. Now there's the description for all the expanded descriptions, but I want to spend time going over this one in particular. Your paper is going to include citations from many sources, including company websites, social media, periodicals, which are magazines or online magazines. These are important in the overall narrative of your text or written paper and should be cited appropriately in your works cited section. However, only published journal article sources will be counted toward this total. So they don't, you should do your best to find a peer reviewed journal article, which would be research or a meta analysis. But if it's something, I mean, typically, if you're in something like the Journal of Clinical Nutrition, all of the articles are going to be peer reviewed. You don't necessarily have to check the peer reviewed box in your search, but you want to make sure that it's an established journal, preferably a study that was done. So those sources, you need to have 10. Some people will have more. You need to have 10. And they to meet, so it's 10 of these peer reviewed or published journal articles. So many of you your works cited page is going to have 20 sources, 25 sources, 15 sources, because all of your company website data, if you cite the FDA website or the USDA, those are all sources which will be under your works cited, but they won't be counted toward the peer reviewed or published journal article sources section. And basically, these each of these type of sources is worth 1 point. So if you get 10, if you give me 10 peer reviewed or published journal article sources, then you get 10 out of 10 points. That's how this section is going to work. Just remember, I'll say it again, it's 10 peer-reviewed or published journal articles, but you're going, if you have the full 10 of those, then you're going to end up with more when you include company websites and social media, online magazines, and all those things. So some of you, for part 3, almost all of the sources you submitted were peer reviewed, so you don't have to look much further. Others, or a lot of you, had half and half, or sometimes someone might have had only 1 or 2 peer reviewed sources. So that means that you already have 10 or 8 to 10 that are not peer reviewed, and you need an additional 10 if you want the full 10 points to that are peer reviewed. So some of you are going to end up If you use all the ones you found from part 3, you're going to have 15 to 20 sources as is. Now, part 3 was done to help give you a jump start on the sources that you could use. You don't have to use every one of those sources, but you absolutely are free to do so. But remember that they have to meet this criteria to count for part 10. I'm sorry, for the 10 points. But you want to make sure that you cite everything appropriately in your works cited. Which brings us to the next section, the citation format, which is worth 2.5 points. Use footnotes at the bottom of the page or a works cited page. The number of each citation used in text should be in parentheses, starting with number 1. The name, author, year published, or any information other than the number in parentheses 1, 2, 3, etc. should be excluded. So only use the numbers 1, 2, 3. If you're unsure how this format looks when you're citing in text, refer back to the research examples that were provided in the module. Which module was it? Let's see. The module from where was it? The October 5th module includes all these articles, and you see the writing style, and we went over this in class where, all right, this one actually has the names and years, but what I want to see is where this would say like Togo, Ulcer, Sorensen, and Heitman 2001, you would just put number 1. And here would be number 2, number 3. Let me see if there's one that actually does it that way. Okay, so here's, and this one uses 1. It's not in parentheses, but I'm going to say just put it in parentheses to make it easier. And they're actually using a footnote style. So whatever people ask, APA, MLA, whatever your other classes are using, or whatever your word processing program uses or has a quick select option for in your drop downs, that's fine. But you see how now I want them in parentheses, not superscript. But so open parenthesis, number 1. Here's 2 through 6. So there's 3 different, I'm sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, 4. And then they're on the next page, of course, footnotes. Here's number 8. Now, if you're so it's the first time that you're using it. So if this number 1 appeared first and then again on page like 25, it would still be number 1. You don't give it a new number. Okay, so we're going back to the assignments. So that's your citation format. Now we move down. These 2 categories here are directly from the university. Every interdisciplinary elective has to do their assignments based on these 2 content areas. They're worth 40 points each, and basically what they're saying is, or what they are evaluating you on, is how well you can communicate you can communicate, in this case, communicate your thoughts or knowledge or the narrative, the story you want to tell about your product and its ingredients, and how well you can draw on different factors or different different disciplines, as we discussed, economics, marketing, psychology, nutrition, food science, logistics, all these things. That's not really a science, but that's, well, it is if you've ever seen it, but it's not a traditional science. It's a part of business. But what I mean is, how what you're evaluated on is how well you can show those parallels and draw from one area of study to bolster and support your thoughts on another content area to put your whole story together. So certain ingredients are better than others. So some products use high quality ingredients. How do they keep the cost down? Or do they keep it expensive and market it only to people that are willing, that can or are willing to pay a higher price? These are some factors that you need to look at and explore and clearly identify the interdisciplinary relationships. The better you are at doing that, the higher your grade, your uh, points are going to be in these two content areas. So these two are 40 points each. That rounds out the total 100 points. Again, this paper is due on November 9th at the beginning of your class time. If you have any questions, as always, send me a message in Canvas or send me an email. Ask me questions early. Try to get a jump on this paper early. This is what you're supposed to be, or this is what you're expected to start working on during class time tomorrow. That's why it's uploaded now. So start soon, ask questions, have fun with it, and I look forward to reading your papers. Thank you.